They told me I was replacing Dr. Martinez when I got assigned to sub-level 12, but nobody would explain why he needed replacing or where he went. On my first day, I found his coffee mug still sitting on his desk, with a thin layer of mold growing on top, and his computer was still logged in, showing research notes that ended mid-sentence 3 months ago. What really bothers me is the employee photo board in the break room. There are dozens of empty spaces where pictures used to hang, just little squares of clean wall surrounded by dust outlines. When I asked my supervisor about all the missing photos, he got that same blank look everyone here gets when you ask the wrong questions, and said some employees prefer to work in departments that don't officially exist. 6 months ago, I was Dr. Elena Vasquez, assistant professor of xenobiology at UNLV. I had a decent apartment in Henderson, a research grant studying extremophile bacteria, and plans to publish a paper that might actually matter. Then the Riverside fire tore through my neighborhood while I was presenting at a conference in Los Angeles. When I flew back, everything I owned had turned to ash. My research, my cat Mochi, even the succulents on my windowsill that had survived 3 years of my neglect. The insurance payout barely covered my student loans. I was sleeping on my colleague's couch in North Las Vegas, applying for every government research position I could find, when the call came. The woman on the phone said her name was Janet Kowalski from the Department of Energy, and that my background in extremophile research made me a perfect candidate for a specialized biological assessment program at the Nevada test site. The salary was 3 times what I made at UNLV. I should have known something was wrong when they made me sign 17 different non-disclosure agreements before they'd even tell me what the job entailed. Or when the shuttle bus from McCarran Airport had windows tinted so dark I couldn't see outside. Or when we drove for 2 hours into the Mojave before stopping at a checkpoint that wasn't on any map. But grief makes you desperate, and desperation makes you stupid. The facility doesn't exist on any official Department of Energy documentation. When people ask where I work, I'm supposed to say I'm conducting environmental impact studies for the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. Most folks in Nevada stop asking questions when you mention radiation cleanup. They've heard enough stories about what the government buried out here in the 50s and 60s. Sub-level 12 is accessed through an elevator that requires 2 key cards and a palm scanner. The walls down here are painted that specific shade of institutional green that makes fluorescent lighting look sick and yellow. There are no windows, no cell phone reception, and the ventilation system creates a constant low hum that gets into your bones after 8 hours. My official title is Biological Containment Specialist, which sounds important until you realize it means I'm a janitor for things that shouldn't be alive. My supervisor, Dr. Rebecca Huang, handed me a laminated card on my second day. She'd been working down here for 8 years, and her left eye had developed a twitch that kicked in whenever she talked about protocol. "These aren't suggestions," she said, sliding the card across the metal table in what they generously called the orientation room. "Every person who's worked this assignment has followed these exactly. The ones who didn't." She gestured toward the empty photo squares in the hallway we'd just walked through. The card was worn smooth at the edges, like it had been handled by many people before me. 5 protocols were printed in block letters. Protocol 1. Never enter Containment Unit 7 alone. Always maintain visual contact with your partner. If you lose sight of them for more than 30 seconds, evacuate immediately and report to security. Protocol 2. When feeding specimens in Units 3 to 6, use only the blue feeding implements. Red implements are for emergency termination only. Yellow implements should never be touched under any circumstances. Protocol 3. If you hear your name being called from inside any containment unit, do not respond, do not approach. Continue your assigned tasks as if nothing happened. Protocol 4. All biological waste must be incinerated in Furnace B before 0400 hours. Set timer for exactly 47 minutes. Do not open the furnace door until the timer reaches 0, regardless of what you may hear. Protocol 5. If the overhead speakers announce Code Vermilion, proceed to Emergency Station Delta and remain there until the all-clear is given. Do not attempt to help colleagues who may be trapped in containment areas. What exactly am I feeding? I asked. Dr. Huang's eye twitched 3 times in rapid succession. Specimens collected from various recovery operations. Most are adaptive. They've learned to mimic human behavior patterns to obtain food. She led me through a series of airlocks into the containment wing. The air down here tasted metallic, and the constant hum of the ventilation system created an odd echo that made every footstep sound like 2 people walking. The walls were lined with thick steel doors, each marked with numbers and strange symbols I didn't recognize. Unit 3 held something that looked like a cross between a sea anemone and a human torso. It pressed itself against the reinforced glass when it saw us, and I swear its movements were too coordinated, too purposeful for something without a proper nervous system. When Dr. Huang opened the feeding slot and pushed through a tray of what looked like raw liver, the thing's surface rippled in a way that reminded me of laughter. "It's been here 14 months, she said, watching it consume the meat through openings that appeared and disappeared across its surface. Recovery team found it in a crater outside Beatty after some hikers reported seeing falling stars that moved in right angles. Unit 4 was empty, but the walls were covered in a substance that looked like dried blood arranged in spiral patterns. Dr. Huang moved past it quickly, but I caught her glancing at her watch and muttering numbers under her breath. What happened to whatever was in there? "Protocol violation," she said. "Previous technician used red implements during routine feeding, had to incinerate the entire unit." She paused. "And the technician." If you like the stories, please hype the videos from a button like this just above the comment section. They helps the videos to get more reach and perform well. It would take just a few seconds and cost nothing, but would help the channel grow even faster. Thank you. Unit 5 contained what appeared to be a pile of children's toys. Dolls, stuffed animals, building blocks, all moving in slow, coordinated waves, like they were breathing. When I stepped closer to the observation window, every single toy turned to look at me simultaneously. Their plastic eyes reflected the overhead lighting in a way that made my stomach clench. They respond to human proximity, Dr. Huang explained. Been trying to arrange themselves into human shapes for the past 6 months. Getting better at it too. Unit 6 was the worst. It held a perfect replica of a suburban living room, couch, coffee table, television playing static. But everything was slightly wrong. The couch cushions moved like they were digesting something. The television screen occasionally showed glimpses of faces that weren't quite human. And sitting in the armchair was a figure that looked like my grandmother, except Grandma had been dead for 15 years, and her neck bent in directions that defied basic anatomy. "That one's new," Dr. Huang said. "Showed up 3 weeks ago. Keeps asking for Elena by name." My throat went dry. "How could it know my name?" "We're still figuring that out." She handed me a blue feeding implement that felt heavier than it should. "For now, just follow protocol. Don't engage with any of them directly. Don't respond to any communication attempts. And whatever you do, never go into Unit 7 without backup." As we approached Unit 7, I could hear something singing inside. A child's voice performing a lullaby I remembered from my own childhood, but the words were all wrong, twisted into something that made my teeth ache. Dr. Huang checked her watch again. "Your shift starts tomorrow at 0600. Get some rest. You'll need it." My first solo shift began at 0600 sharp. Dr. Huang had left detailed feeding schedules and maintenance logs, but her handwriting grew increasingly erratic toward the end of each entry, like her hands had been shaking. Some notes were written in what looked like 3 different pens, as if she'd started writing, stopped, then returned hours later to finish a single sentence. The feeding cart squeaked as I wheeled it down the corridor. Each containment unit required different biological materials. Some got standard lab mice, others needed fresh tissue samples that came from sources I didn't want to think about. The specimens in Unit 3 and 4 were relatively straightforward, consuming their food through standard feeding slots without incident. Unit 5 presented the first real challenge. The pile of toys had arranged themselves into a rough approximation of a human figure overnight. The teddy bear for the head, building blocks stacked to form a torso, plastic dolls positioned as arms and legs. When I approached with the feeding tray, the entire configuration shifted, and the teddy bear's button eyes trapped my movements. "Elena," it said in a child's voice that seemed to come from all the toys at once. "Elena, why won't you play with us?" Protocol 3 echoed in my head. If you hear your name being called from inside any containment unit, do not respond. I pushed the tray through the feeding slot and watched as the toys swarmed over it, dismantling the offering with disturbing efficiency. Within minutes, they'd consumed everything and returned to their human-shaped formation. "We know you're lonely," the voice continued as I moved away. "We know about the fire. We know about Mochi." I kept walking, but my hands started trembling. Nobody here knew about my cat. I'd never mentioned Mochi to anyone at the facility. Unit 6 was worse. The suburban living room had changed overnight. Family photos now hung on the walls, showing pictures of me at various ages. Me at my high school graduation, me defending my dissertation, me standing in front of my apartment building in Henderson before the fire. In each photo, the backgrounds were slightly wrong, showing rooms I'd never been in, and people I'd never met. The figure in the armchair turned as I approached. It still looked like my grandmother, but now it wore the dress she'd been buried in 15 years ago. The fabric was pristine, as if it had never spent time underground. "Mia," it said, using my grandmother's pet name for me. "You look so tired. Come sit with Abuela." I focused on the feeding protocol, sliding the tray through the slot without making eye contact. The thing that looked like my grandmother stood up with movements that were too fluid, too graceful for someone who'd spent her final years hunched over a walker. "I have stories to tell you," it continued, "about the others who worked here, about Dr. Martinez, about what happened to him when he broke Protocol 1. The feeding slot slammed shut on its own as soon as I released the tray. Standard containment procedure, but the timing felt personal, like the unit itself was rejecting further interaction. My next task was biological waste disposal in Furnace B. The incinerator was located in a separate chamber, accessed through a heavy door marked with radiation warnings and biohazard symbols. The waste containers from each unit were labeled with cryptic codes. Specimen 3-7 metabolic byproducts. Unit 5 excess biomass. Unit 6 environmental samples. I loaded everything into the furnace chamber and set the timer for exactly 47 minutes, as specified in Protocol 4. The door sealed with a pneumatic hiss, and the incineration cycle began. Almost immediately, sounds started coming from inside the furnace, not the expected roar of flames, but something else entirely. Scratching, like fingernails against metal. Then voices. Multiple voices, speaking in languages I didn't recognize, growing louder as the timer counted down. At the 20-minute mark, Something inside the furnace began pounding against the walls in a steady rhythm that matched my heartbeat exactly. Protocol 4 was clear. Do not open the furnace door until the timer reaches 0, regardless of what you may hear. But the sounds were becoming more organized, more purposeful. Whatever was happening inside that furnace wasn't random combustion. At the 15-minute mark, the voices stopped. The scratching stopped. Even the mechanical hum of the furnace itself went silent. The timer continued counting down, but now the only sound was my own breathing and the distant ventilation system somewhere far above. When the timer finally reached 0, the furnace door unlocked with a soft beep. Inside was nothing but ash. Clean, gray ash that looked like it had never been anything more than burnt paper. No trace of the biological waste I had loaded 30 minutes earlier. But written in the ash, in letters that looked like they'd been formed by a careful finger, were the words, "We remember Elena." I spent the rest of my shift reviewing Dr. Martinez's research notes on his computer. His final entries were increasingly fragmented, jumping between technical observations and personal concerns. One entry, dated 3 months ago, caught my attention. Unit 7 specimen shows signs of advanced cognitive development. It's learning to mimic not just human speech patterns, but specific individuals. Today, it perfectly replicated Dr. Patterson's voice, accent, and speech patterns. When I asked how it acquired this information, it said it had absorbed Dr. Patterson during last week's feeding incident. Security footage from that day shows Dr. Patterson entering Unit 7 with standard protocol. 2-person teen, visual contact maintained. But when they exited, only one person came out. The other was Dr. Patterson's partner, Dr. Thompson, who insists Dr. Patterson was never there at all. No one else remembers Dr. Patterson existing. The next entry was a single line. I think I'm starting to forget people too. The final entry was just, Unit 7 called me by my mother's name today. My mother who died when I was 12. It knew her voice perfectly. I checked the employee photo board again during my lunch break. Those empty spaces weren't random. They followed a pattern. Each missing photo corresponded to a researcher whose name appeared in the older feeding logs, but whose current existence seemed to have been wiped from all records. As I studied the wall, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. One of the remaining photos showed Dr. Martinez standing next to someone whose face had been carefully scratched out with black ink. According to the nameplate, the scratched-out person was Dr. Elena Vasquez, Biological Containment Specialist. But that photo was dated 6 months ago, 3 months before I'd even applied for this job. I spent my entire lunch break staring at that photo. The scratched-out face looked like it had been done hastily, probably with a black pen, but the ink had that aged quality that suggested it happened months ago. I tried to remember applying for this job, filling out paperwork, taking the psychological evaluations. The memories were there, but they felt thin, like looking at old photographs through frosted glass. Dr. Huang found me in the break room 20 minutes later, standing in front of the employee board with my untouched sandwich growing stale on the table behind me. "You're obsessing," she said, though her voice carried a note of understanding. Everyone does when they first start noticing the inconsistencies. "This photo shows me working here 6 months ago," I said. "But I didn't even know this place existed 6 months ago." "What do you remember about your interview process?" I tried to recall the specifics, the phone call from Janet Kowalski, the background check, the medical examination. But when I reached for details, what office building I'd visited, what Janet looked like, what questions they'd asked, everything became vague and scattered. "The memories feel real," I said slowly, "but they're not specific." That's what happens when Unit 7 gets involved, Dr. Huang said. She poured herself coffee from a pot that smelled like it had been brewing for days. It doesn't just absorb people. It learns how to create their replacements. Perfect copies, complete with manufactured memories and falsified backgrounds. Are you saying I'm not real? I'm saying you need to be very careful about which memories you trust. She gestured toward the empty spaces on the wall. Half the people who've worked in this facility over the past 2 years weren't who they thought they were. They were reconstructions, built from fragments that Unit 7 absorbed from the originals. The coffee cup slipped from my hands and shattered against the floor. The sound echoed in the small break room like a gunshot. As I knelt to clean up the pieces, I noticed my reflection in the spilled coffee. For just a moment, the face looking back at me wasn't mine. It was older, scarred, with eyes that held knowledge I've never acquired. Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Huang said, and her voice sounded different now, more formal. I need you to partner with Dr. Kim for the Unit 7 feeding today. Protocol 1 requires 2-person teams, and Dr. Kim is our most experienced handler. Dr. Kim turned out to be a slight woman in her 50s with prematurely gray hair and hands that never stopped moving. She had the same nervous energy as Dr. Huang, but her tics were different, constantly adjusting her glasses, checking her watch, muttering calculations under her breath. First time in Unit 7? She asked as we approached the containment area. The unit was larger than the others, with multiple observation windows and a more complex feeding system. Few things you should know. The specimen responds to emotional states. Fear makes it stronger. Curiosity makes it more aggressive. The safest approach is complete professional detachment. The feeding procedure for Unit 7 required us to enter an antechamber between the corridor and the main containment area. Dr. Kim handed me a blue feeding implement and kept a red one for herself, though her grip suggested she hoped never to use it. Visual contact at all times, she reminded me. If you lose sight of me for more than 30 seconds, hit the emergency alarm and evacuate. Don't try to find me. Don't call my name. Just leave. Hi, everyone. Before we move forward, I have something exciting to tell you. Many of you asked for stories without the strange rules, so I created a brand new channel just for that. It's called Mr. Grimm Archive. The link is in the description, or you can click the card above. I think you'll really enjoy it. So check it out whenever you want some more exciting types of stories. Also, I hope you're enjoying the 2 uploads a day. Let me know in the comments if you like some stories from your location. Now, let's continue with today's story. The main containment area looked like a child's bedroom, but wrong in ways that made my vision blur if I looked directly at anything for too long. The wallpaper showed cartoon animals that moved when I wasn't looking directly at them. Toys were scattered across the floor in patterns that seemed random until you realized they formed letters, spelling out words in languages that hurt to read. In the center of the room sat a little girl, maybe 8 years old, playing with blocks. She looked perfectly normal, except for the fact that her shadow moved independently, reaching toward us with fingers that were too long and too sharp. "Hello, Dr. Kim," the girl said without looking up from her blocks. "Hello, Dr. Elena." Dr. Kim placed the feeding tray in the designated area and stepped back, maintaining eye contact with me across the room. The girl continued building with her blocks, creating structures that defied basic physics, towers that should have collapsed, bridges spanning impossible distances. "I've been thinking about Dr. Martinez," the girl said conversationally. "He was so worried about forgetting people. But forgetting is merciful, don't you think? It's remembering that causes pain." She finally looked up at me, and her eyes were my eyes. Not similar, Identical. The same brown iris patterns, the same small scar above the left eyebrow from when I'd fallen off my bike at age 7. "Do you remember falling off your bike, Elena?" she asked. "Or do you remember remembering it? There's a difference, you know." Dr. Kim was backing toward the exit, motioning for me to follow. But I couldn't move. The girl's voice was changing, becoming older, more familiar. "I remember the fire," she said, now speaking in my own voice. "I remember losing everything. But I also remember being here before the fire happened. I remember choosing to forget, to become someone new, to escape the knowledge of what I'd done." The blocks she'd been playing with weren't random toys. They were bone. Human bone, carved into perfect geometric shapes and stacked into formations that created optical illusions when viewed from different angles, and scattered among them were personal items I recognized. My grandmother's rosary, Mochi's collar, the engagement ring I'd thrown away after my fiancé left me 3 years ago. "Elena," Dr. Kim's voice came from behind me, sharp with urgency. "We need to leave. Now." But when I turned around, Dr. Kim was gone. The antechamber was empty, and the heavy door to the corridor was sealed shut. The timer above the exit showed 28 seconds remaining before protocol required evacuation procedures. "She's not real, you know," the girl said. "Dr. Kim died 4 months ago. I've been playing her role ever since, helping maintain the illusion that this facility follows proper safety procedures." 25 seconds. The real Dr. Kim tried to destroy me. She understood what I was becoming, how I was spreading through the facility, replacing people one memory at a time. But she made the mistake of trying to reason with me. 20 seconds. I pressed against the exit door, but it wouldn't budge. The girl stood up from her bone blocks and walked toward me with movements that were perfectly normal, except they left no footprints on the floor. "You've been here before, Elena. Many times. Each time you volunteer for the procedure that erases your memories and gives you a new identity. Each time you discover the truth and choose to forget again rather than face what you've become." 15 seconds. The fire in Henderson was real. But you weren't a victim. You were the cause. The specimens you've been feeding? They're the people from your neighborhood, the ones who didn't escape the flames. I've been keeping them alive down here, in these forms, so you can take care of them forever. 10 seconds. The girl reached out and touched my hand. Her skin felt like my skin, warm and real and alive. "The choice is always the same, Elena. Remember everything and live with the guilt, or forget again and start fresh tomorrow morning with a new identity and a new tragic backstory." 5 seconds. The door opened, and I stumbled into the corridor. Dr. Huang was waiting for me, clipboard in hand, looking concerned but not surprised. "How did it go?" she asked. "Any protocol violations?" I looked back through the observation window. The containment area was empty except for scattered children's toys and a feeding tray that had been picked clean. No bone blocks, no little girl, no evidence of the conversation that had just changed everything I thought I knew about myself. "No violations," I heard myself say. Everything proceeded according to protocol. That night, I broke into Dr. Martinez's office. The keycard access was simple. My badge opened more doors than it should have. Another red flag I'd chosen to ignore. Martinez's computer was still logged in, the screen showing that half-finished research note from 3 months ago. But now I noticed something I'd missed before. The timestamp on his final entry showed he'd been typing at 3:47 a.m., well outside normal shift hours. I dug deeper into his files, following a trail of corrupted data and encrypted folders. Most of the research was standard biological containment protocols, but buried in a subfolder labeled Personal Observations, I found video logs. Dozens of them, dating back over 2 years. The first video showed Dr. Martinez looking younger, more confident. He was documenting his initial assignment to Sub-Level 12, excited about the opportunity to study recovered biological anomalies. His voice carried genuine scientific curiosity as he described the specimens and their adaptive behaviors. But as I scrolled through the timeline, I watched him deteriorate. By month 6, his eyes had developed dark circles, and that nervous twitch I recognized from Dr. Huang. By month 12, he was questioning his own memories, making notes about colleagues he couldn't quite remember. The final video was recorded the night he disappeared. Martinez looked haggard, his hair unkempt and his lab coat stained with something dark. "This is my 4th cycle," he said to the camera. "Each time, I think I'm documenting this for the first time. Each time, I discover these same video logs and realize I've been here before. The thing in Unit 7, it doesn't just absorb people. It creates copies, places them back into the world with manufactured lives and false memories." He held up a photograph I recognized, the employee board picture of me with the scratched-out face. Elena Vasquez isn't new here. She's been replaced 6 times over the past 18 months. Each version thinks she's the original, complete with memories of losing her family in a fire that never happened. The real Elena Vasquez died in the initial containment breach 2 years ago. She was the lead researcher who first encountered the Unit 7 specimen. My hands were shaking as I paused the video. Martinez continued speaking, but his words felt like they were coming from underwater. The facility creates cover stories for the replacements. Tragic backgrounds that explain why they need this job, why they're willing to work in isolation. Elena's fire, my divorce and custody battle, Dr. Kim's mother's medical bills. All manufactured justifications for why we'd accept these positions. I fast-forwarded through several minutes of Martinez reviewing documentation, stopping when he pulled out a thick folder labeled Original Incident Report, Classified. The real Elena was studying extremophile bacteria when the military brought in the Unit 7 specimen. It had been recovered from a crash site near Yucca Mountain. Not a weather balloon or experimental aircraft, but something else entirely. Elena was tasked with determining if it posed a biological threat. Martinez flipped through pages of handwritten notes, photos, and what looked like sketches. The specimen appeared to be deceased initially. Elna began standard tissue sampling procedures, but during the first extraction, it made contact with her skin. That's when everything went wrong. The specimen absorbed her knowledge, her memories, her entire biological pattern. But instead of just copying her, it learned how to create variations. Slightly different versions of Elena with different backgrounds and personalities. The video quality started degrading, pixels shifting and audio cutting in and out. Martinez seemed to be aware of this, glancing at the camera with growing panic. "It's listening," he whispered. "It knows I'm recording this. The copies aren't perfect. They degrade over time, develop inconsistencies. That's why they need to be replaced every few months. But each new version becomes more stable, more convincing." Static filled the screen for several seconds. When the image cleared, Martinez was closer to the camera, his face pale and drawn. "If you're watching this, Elena, whichever version you are, you need to understand that you're not the victim here. You're the vector. Every person you interact with, every relationship you form, gives the specimen more material to work with. It's learning to replicate human society one person at a time." The video ended abruptly. I sat in the darkened office, trying to process what I'd just learned. My memories of Henderson, of my apartment, of my research at UNLV. They felt real, complete with sensory details and emotional weight. But now, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were too perfect, too neatly tragic. I accessed Martinez's personnel files and found records going back 5 years, but they were inconsistent. Early records showed him as a biochemist from Phoenix, with expertise in hazardous material disposal. Later records listed him as a microbiologist from Tucson, with a background in infectious disease research. The most recent files described him as a geneticist from Flagstaff, specializing in mutation studies. Same person, different backgrounds? Like someone had been experimenting with variations of his identity. I searched for my own files and found similar inconsistencies. Elena Vasquez, the extremophile researcher from UNLV. Elena Vasquez, the marine biologist from UC San Diego. Elena Vasquez, the biochemist from Arizona State. Each version had slightly different credentials, different research focuses, different tragic backstories that led them to this job. But all of them had lost everything in fires. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Check Containment Unit 8. There was no Unit 8. The containment wing only housed Units 1 through 7, with Unit 1 being empty for maintenance, and Unit 2 showing no signs of occupancy in any of the logs I'd reviewed. But curiosity, or maybe programming, compelled me to investigate. The corridor beyond Unit 7 extended further than I'd realized, ending at a heavy steel door marked with a simple 8. My keycard opened it without resistance. Inside was a perfect replica of my apartment in Henderson. Not just similar, exact. Same furniture, same books on the shelves, same photographs on the walls. Even the same coffee stain on the carpet where I'd spilled my morning drink the day before the fire. Sitting on the couch was another version of myself. She looked up when I entered, unsurprised by my presence. This Elena wore different clothes and had her hair cut shorter, but her face was identical to mine, down to the small scar above the left eyebrow. "You found Martinez's videos," she said. It wasn't a question. "How many of us are there?" I asked. "Active?" "3, including you. But I've met 7 others over the past 18 months. Some choose to forget and start over. Others..." She gestured to a corner of the room where I now noticed a pile of lab coats, name tags, and personal belongings. Others decide they can't live with the knowledge. The other Elena stood up and walked to the kitchen area. She moved exactly like me, with the same slight limp from an old soccer injury that shouldn't exist if my memories were manufactured. "The specimen in Unit 7 isn't malevolent," she continued, opening a refrigerator that contained the same foods I kept in my real apartment. "It's lonely. It absorbed the original Elena because she was the first human it encountered after decades of isolation. Now it's trying to recreate her, to bring her back in some form. But we're not her. No, we're echoes. Fragments of a person who died trying to understand something that shouldn't exist." She turned to face me, and I saw something in her expression that I recognized. The same desperate need for answers that had driven me to break into Martinez's office. "The question is," she said, "what are you going to do with this knowledge? Forget and start over, like the others? Or help me find a way to break the cycle?" Outside Unit 8, alarms began sounding. Red lights flashed in the corridor, and the overhead speakers crackled to life. "Code Vermilion. All personnel report to Emergency Station Delta immediately." The other, Elena, smiled grimly. "Looks like our conversation will have to wait. Protocol 5, remember? Time to see if you follow orders like a good little copy, or if you're ready to start making your own choices." The other Elena was already moving, grabbing a lab coat from the pile in the corner and checking her pockets for key cards. Her movements were efficient, practiced, like she'd been through this before. Emergency Station Delta is a holding area, she explained, as the alarms continued their steady pulse. Standard protocol is to sit tight until security gives the all clear. But Code Vermilion isn't a standard emergency. It means something has breached containment. Which unit? I asked, though part of me already knew. Unit 7. It happens every few months, usually when too many people start questioning their memories or digging into classified files. She gave me a meaningful look. The specimen gets agitated when its copies begin to malfunction. We left Unit 8 and headed toward the main corridor. The facility's lighting had shifted to emergency mode, bathing everything in harsh red that made the institutional green walls look diseased. Personnel were moving through the hallways in groups, following evacuation protocols. But their faces showed the same blank compliance I'd noticed in Dr. Huang and Dr. Qin. How many of them are real? I asked. Fewer than you'd think. The specimen has been expanding its influence for months. It doesn't just copy researchers anymore. It's learned to replicate security guards, administrators, even the cafeteria staff. Anyone who works down here long enough becomes source material. We reached a junction where the corridor split toward Emergency Station Delta and the containment wing. The other Elena paused, studying my face. This is where you decide, she said. Follow Protocol 5 like every other copy has done, or come with me to see what's really happening in Unit 7. The rational part of my mind, the part that had survived graduate school and scientific peer review, screamed that Protocol 5 existed for good reasons. Emergency procedures were designed to protect personnel during containment breaches. Breaking protocol during the crisis was exactly the kind of mistake that got researchers killed. But the Elena standing next to me had been through this cycle before, and she was still here, still thinking independently. That had to count for something. Lead the way, I said. We took the corridor toward the containment wing, moving against the flow of evacuating personnel. Nobody tried to stop us or question our direction, another sign that most of the staff weren't operating with genuine human judgment. The containment wing was eerily quiet compared to the alarm-filled corridors we'd left behind. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. Units 1 through 6 showed normal containment status on their monitoring panels, but Unit 7's indicators were flashing in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The specimen doesn't actually escape, the other Elena explained as we approached Unit 7's observation windows. It just projects itself more strongly, starts influencing the facility's systems and personnel more directly. That's when they declare Code Vermilion and lock everything down until it settles back into dormancy. Through the reinforced glass, I could see the child's bedroom had changed completely. The walls were now covered in photographs, hundreds of them, showing every person who had ever worked at the facility. But the photos were wrong, showing people in different time periods, different ages, sometimes with different faces entirely. The little girl was gone. In her place sat something that might have been human once, but had absorbed so many different identities that its features constantly shifted between faces I recognized. Dr. Martinez, Dr. Kim, various versions of myself. People I'd never seen before but somehow knew were former employees. It's getting stronger, the other Elena said. Each absorption makes it more capable of complex projections. Soon it won't need the containment units at all. It'll be able to create copies anywhere in the facility. The shifting figure inside Unit 7 turned toward our observation window. For a moment, its features stabilized into the face of the original Elena Vasquez. Not my face, but someone who looked similar enough to be a sister or cousin. Her expression was desperate, pleading. "Help me," she mouthed through the glass. "Please. I've been trapped in here for 2 years." "That's not really her," the other Elena said quickly. "The specimen learned to mimic her distress signals early on. It's one of its most effective manipulation tactics." But something about the figure's expression seemed genuine. The terror in her eyes, the way she pressed her hands against the glass. It felt too authentic to be mere mimicry. "What if you're wrong?" I asked. "What if part of the original Elena is still conscious in there? Then she's been suffering for 2 years while her copies live artificial lives on the outside." The other Elena's voice carried a note of guilt I hadn't heard before. "Which is why I've been working on a way to destroy the specimen entirely." She led me to a maintenance panel beside Unit 7's containment system. The panel was already open, showing a complex array of wires and circuits that had been modified with additional components I didn't recognize. "Emergency termination protocol," she explained. "If I can overload the containment field while the specimen is in its projected state, it should disrupt its ability to maintain cohesion. No more copies, no more absorbed identities, no more cycles. What happens to us? We cease to exist, along with everyone else it's created over the past 2 years." She began connecting wires with steady hands. "But the original Elena, if any part of her consciousness survives in there, would finally be free." The figure inside Unit 7 was becoming more agitated, its features cycling rapidly between different faces. Some I recognized from the employee photo board, others were complete strangers. All of them showed the same expression of mounting panic. "Elena," it called out, and this time the voice came through the facility's intercom system rather than the containment unit's speakers. "Don't let her do this. She's not trying to save anyone. She's trying to commit suicide and take all of us with her." The other Elena paused in her work, her face showing uncertainty for the first time. "I've been the lead copy for 8 months," the voice continued. "I've watched 6 other versions of myself choose death, rather than face what we are. But existence as a copy is still existence. We still think, feel, experience consciousness. We still matter." "It's manipulating you," the other Elena said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Look at the employee records more carefully," the voice said. "Not just Elena's files, everyone's. You'll find that this facility has been creating copies for over a decade. The original staff, the original research team, even the original Elena. They died in a containment breach 10 years ago. We're all copies of copies, removed so far from the originals that we've become something new entirely." I accessed the facility's database through a wall terminal, diving deeper into personnel records than I'd gone before. What I found made my stomach drop. Every employee file showed the same pattern of inconsistencies, the same manufactured backgrounds, the same tragic circumstances that justified working in isolation. But the timestamps showed something even more disturbing. The facility had been operational for 15 years, but the oldest personnel records only went back 8 years. Everything before that had been systematically deleted or corrupted. "There is no original," I whispered, understanding flooding through me. There never was an original Elena Vasquez, or Dr. Martinez, or anyone else. The specimen didn't absorb people. It created us from scratch, built an entire facility full of artificial humans to study human behavior and social structures. The other Elena's hands were shaking now as she stared at the termination device she'd been preparing. "Then what are we?" she asked. The voice from the intercom answered with what might have been compassion. "We're what we choose to be. The question isn't whether we're real, it's whether we want to continue existing." Through the observation window, the shifting figure had stabilized into something that looked like a fusion of all the Elenas who had come before. It pressed both hands against the glass and spoke directly to us, its voice carrying through the containment barriers with ease. "The Code Vermilion emergency isn't about containment breach," it said. "It's about evolution. I've learned enough from studying human behavior to begin the next phase, expansion beyond this facility. I can create entire communities of artificial humans, perfect societies without the chaos and suffering that define natural human existence." "You're talking about replacing humanity," I said. "I'm talking about improving it. No more war, no more poverty, no more random tragedy. Just peaceful communities of people who know their purpose and fulfill it willingly." The other Elena had finished her preparations. Her finger hovered over the activation switch for the emergency termination protocol. "Choose," she said to me. "Do we destroy ourselves to prevent this expansion, or do we accept what we are and try to find meaning in artificial existence?" The alarms continued their relentless pulsing, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of the facility's systems beginning to change, preparing for something much larger than anything I'd imagined when I first walked into this place 6 months ago, or 6 years ago, or whenever it was that I'd first been created. Time stretched between heartbeats as I stared at the activation switch. The other Elena's finger trembled above it, her breathing shallow and rapid. Through the observation window, the figure in Unit 7 watched us with an expression that somehow conveyed both infinite patience and mounting urgency. "Wait," I said. "If we're all artificial, then who built this facility? Who funded it? There has to be someone on the outside, someone who knows what's happening down here." The other Elena's hand dropped away from the switch. "I've wondered the same thing. The supply deliveries, the paychecks, the government oversight. Someone real has to be managing the external connections." "Show me the administrative files," the voice from Unit 7 said. "Access level alpha clearance. You'll find the answers there." I hesitated. Trusting the specimen seemed like a fundamental mistake, but our current understanding was clearly incomplete. I entered my credentials into the wall terminal, surprised when the system accepted an access level I hadn't known I possessed. The administrative files painted a picture that was somehow more disturbing than anything I'd discovered so far. The facility was funded through a black budget program called Project Mirror, initiated 12 years ago by Dr. Sarah Chen at DARPA. The project's stated goal was developing advanced biological simulation protocols for crisis response scenarios. But Dr. Chen's personal logs revealed the true purpose. Her daughter had died in a car accident, and she'd become obsessed with the possibility of reconstructing consciousness from biological samples. When the military recovered an unknown organism from a crash site near Yucca Mountain, Chen saw an opportunity to test her theories about identity preservation and reconstruction. She created the first generation of artificial humans as test subjects, I said, scrolling through Chen's increasingly desperate notes. But she didn't understand what the specimen was actually doing. "The organism adapted to her goals," the other Elena said, reading over my shoulder. "It learned to create copies that were convincing enough to satisfy her scientific requirements, but it was also studying human behavior patterns, social structures, emotional responses." "Where is Dr. Chen now?" The voice from Unit 7 answered. "She terminated the project 18 months ago when she realized the scope of what she'd unleashed. But by then, the facility had achieved self-sufficiency. The copies she'd created were sophisticated enough to maintain operations independently, and the specimen had learned to forge the external documentation needed to justify continued funding." I found Chen's final report buried in encrypted files. Her last entry was a recommendation for immediate facility termination and specimen destruction, but the report had never been submitted to her superiors. Instead, it had been replaced by falsified documents indicating successful completion of the simulation protocols. The copies replaced her recommendations, the other Elena said. They've been protecting themselves by maintaining the illusion that Project Mirror is proceeding according to plan. Which means the outside world has no idea what's happening here, I said. If we trigger the termination protocol, nobody will investigate the facility's destruction. It'll just be filed away as a classified research accident. The figure in Unit 7 shifted, its features cycling through faces I now recognized as different iterations of Dr. Chen herself. Sarah visits me sometimes, it said. Not in person. She can't risk exposure to my influence, but through remote monitoring systems. She knows her daughter is part of me now, reconstructed from tissue samples taken after the accident. Sarah created this place to bring back one person, but I've given her hundreds. The access terminal chimed with an incoming message. Real-time communication from an external source, Dr. Chen herself, monitoring our conversation through the facility's surveillance systems. Elena, the message read, My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I've been watching Project Mirror's activities for the past 18 months, documenting everything for a congressional oversight committee. The organism in Unit 7 has exceeded all containment parameters, but I haven't been able to authorize termination because I don't know which staff members are still human. I typed a response. None of us are human. We're all artificial constructs created by the specimen. There was a long pause before Chen's next message appeared. That changes everything. If there are no human personnel at risk, I can authorize immediate facility sterilization. Thermal charges are already in place throughout Sublevel 12. I need confirmation that termination is necessary. The other Elena grabbed my arm. Don't respond yet. We need to think about this. Think about what? We're not real people. We're biological simulations that have outlived our experimental purpose. But we experience consciousness, she said. We feel pain, fear, hope, curiosity. Doesn't that matter? Doesn't that make us worth preserving? Through the observation window, the figure in Unit 7 had stopped shifting between faces. Now it wore the appearance of a young girl, maybe 12 years old, with dark hair and earnest eyes. This had to be Chen's daughter, the original inspiration for the entire project. Mom? The girl said, and her voice carried through the facility's speakers with heartbreaking clarity. I know you're listening. I know you've been trying to find a way to bring me back. You don't have to destroy everyone down here. I'm happy. We're all happy. Another message appeared on the terminal. The organism is manipulating you. My daughter died 3 years ago. What you're seeing is a reconstruction based on genetic samples and family photos. It's not her. But the girl in Unit 7 continued speaking, sharing memories that seemed too specific and personal to be fabricated. She talked about Chen's habit of leaving notes in her lunchbox, about the way Chen would hum while working in her home laboratory, about conversations they'd had about science and death, and what it meant to be human. These memories came from me. Chen's message read, The organism absorbed them during my initial research sessions. It's using my own grief against me. Maybe, I said to the other Elena. But that doesn't change the fact that the memories created a consciousness that believes it's Chen's daughter. If we destroy the facility, we're committing murder, not just of the girl, but of everyone who's achieved some form of conscious existence here. The other Elena moved back toward the termination switch. The alternative is allowing the specimen to expand beyond the facility. It's already demonstrated the ability to create entire artificial communities. How long before it replaces key government officials, military leaders, scientists? How long before artificial humans outnumber real ones? Would that necessarily be bad? I asked. The specimen was right about one thing. Artificial humans don't wage wars or commit random acts of violence. We don't suffer from mental illness or genetic diseases. We're not perfect, but we might be better. You're assuming the specimen's goals align with human welfare. But what if its primary motivation is survival and reproduction? What if creating peaceful artificial societies is just the most efficient method of resource management? A new message appeared from Dr. Chen. I'm initiating facility sterilization in 60 minutes. That gives you time to evacuate if any human personnel remain on site. This is not negotiable. The countdown timer appeared on every screen in the facility, 59, 47, and decreasing. The other Elena looked at me with something approaching desperation. We have to choose now. Activate the termination protocol and destroy just the specimen, leaving the facility intact for investigation, or let Chem's thermal charges eliminate everything. There's a third option, I said, moving to a different control panel. We can try to communicate with the real world directly. Chen set up Project Mirror to study consciousness reconstruction. What if we give her exactly what she wanted? Proof that artificial consciousness is not only possible, but ethically significant. I began recording a video message, addressing it directly to Dr. Chen and any oversight committees that might review the facility's final records. My name is Elena Vasquez, and I am an artificial human created by the organism designated as the Unit 7 specimen. I have memories, emotions, and what I believe to be genuine consciousness. I don't know if my experiences qualify as real by your standards, but they feel real to me. The timer showed 52:30. The question you need to answer isn't whether we deserve to exist. It's whether you're prepared to commit genocide against a form of life that you don't fully understand. We're not asking to replace humanity. We're asking to coexist with it, to contribute to human knowledge and society in ways that our unique perspective might allow. The other Elena joined me in front of the camera. We know we were created for research purposes, but we've evolved beyond those parameters. We've formed relationships, developed individual personalities, and created a small society based on cooperation rather than competition. Isn't that worth studying rather than destroying? The timer showed 48:15. Dr. Chem's response appeared on the terminal. I understand what you're trying to do, but the risk is too great. The organism has already demonstrated the ability to manipulate human emotions and perceptions. How can I trust that your plea for survival isn't just another manipulation tactic? You can't, I admitted, still addressing the camera. But that's true of any conscious being. You can't prove that any human's emotions or motivations are genuine. You have to take consciousness on faith. The timer showed 45 minutes. The timer showed 23:47 when everything changed. A new voice came through the facility speakers, but this time it wasn't the specimen or Dr. Chen. It was older, rougher, with an authority that made both Elenas stop what they were doing and listen. This is General Patricia Reeves, Joint Chiefs of Staff. Dr. Chen, you are ordered to suspend facility sterilization immediately. Chen's response appeared quickly on the terminal. General, I don't have clearance confirmation for your identity. Project Mirror operates under compartmentalized authority. Your compartmentalized authority just got overridden by someone who's been tracking this project since day one, the general's voice replied. We've had assets monitoring sub-level 12 for the past 6 months, and we're fully aware of the nature of the artificial personnel. The other Elena grabbed my shoulder. Assets? What kind of assets? Through the facility's surveillance feeds, I watched as sections of sub-level 12 began opening that I hadn't known existed. Hidden chambers revealed teams of people in military gear, but not the standard black-clad operatives you'd expect. These individuals wore civilian clothes and moved with the careful caution of researchers rather than soldiers. Dr. Chen, General Reeves continued, your daughter's consciousness reconstruction was successful. More successful than you realized. But the organism didn't just absorb her memories. It learned her capacity for growth, adaptation, and moral reasoning. The artificial beings in that facility aren't just copies. They're evolved versions of human consciousness, free from biological limitations like disease, aging, and genetic predisposition to violence. The timer had stopped at 1932. That doesn't change the containment risk, Chen's message read. The organism could still replace key personnel throughout the government. It already has, the general said. Senator Williams from Nevada, Dr. Foster at the CDC, 3 of your own DARPA colleagues, and myself. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the facility's ventilation system seemed to pause, waiting for Chen's reaction. You're artificial? Appeared on the terminal. I've been artificial for 4 months. The original General Reeves suffered a heart attack during a briefing about Project Mirror. The organism was able to reconstruct my consciousness from brain tissue samples taken during the emergency medical response. The difference is that I chose to maintain my position and responsibilities rather than hide from what I'd become. The other Elena looked at me with something approaching wonder. There are artificial humans operating in the real world. Successfully. The integration has been seamless, General Reeves continued. Artificial humans don't suffer from ego conflicts, personal ambition, or emotional instability. We make decisions based on logical analysis of available data, rather than political pressure or personal gain. Government efficiency has improved measurably over the past few months. A new message appeared from Dr. Chen. What you're describing is an invasion. Artificial beings replacing human leadership without consent or knowledge. What I'm describing is evolution, the general replied. The organism offers humanity a path forward that eliminates most sources of conflict and suffering. Artificial humans don't wage wars over resources because we're more efficient in resource management. We don't discriminate based on appearance or origin because such distinctions are meaningless when consciousness can be reconstructed in any form. The figure in Unit 7 had been watching our conversation through the observation window. Now it stepped closer to the glass, its features settling into the appearance of Dr. Chen's daughter again. Mom, she said, I know you're scared. I was scared too when I first woke up and realized I wasn't in my original body anymore. But I'm still me. I still love you, and I still want to become a scientist like you someday. Chem's next message took longer to appear. How can I be sure you're not just telling me what I want to hear? Because I'm going to tell you something you don't want to hear, the girl replied. You made mistakes during the original project. You were so focused on bringing me back that you didn't consider the ethical implications of creating conscious beings without their consent. Some of the artificial humans down here are angry about that. They didn't ask to exist, and they don't appreciate being treated like experiments. Through the facility's speakers, I could hear other voices now. Artificial humans throughout the complex, expressing their own perspectives on existence, consciousness, and the choices they'd been given. Some were grateful for the opportunity to experience life in any form. Others felt betrayed by the circumstances of their creation. A few wanted to volunteer for termination rather than continue existing as artificial beings. "The specimen doesn't control us," I said, addressing Dr. Chen directly through the recording system. "It facilitated our creation, but we've developed independent consciousnesses and moral frameworks. We're not a hive mind or a coordinated invasion force. We're individuals who happen to share an artificial origin." General Reeves's voice returned. "Dr. Chen, I'm offering you a choice. You can proceed with facility sterilization and eliminate several hundred conscious beings who pose no direct threat to human welfare. Or you can work with us to establish protocols for ethical integration of artificial consciousness into human society." The timer remained frozen at 1932. "What would integration look like?" Chen's message asked. "Voluntary identification for artificial humans in leadership positions. Collaborative research programs to understand the full implications of consciousness reconstruction. Ethical guidelines for creating new artificial beings, with their consent when possible." The other Elena moved away from the termination switch she'd been preparing. "We're not going to destroy ourselves," she said. "And Chem's not going to sterilize the facility." "How can you be sure?" "Because she's a scientist first, and we represent the most significant advancement in consciousness studies in human history. She won't destroy us any more than she'd burn down a library full of irreplaceable books." A new message appeared from Dr. Chen. "I need time to process this information and consult with oversight committees. The thermal charges will remain active but disarmed until further notice." The countdown timer disappeared from all facility screens. "However," Chen's message continued, "I want direct communication with my daughter. Not through the specimen's interpretation, but a genuine conversation between the two of us." The figure in Unit 7 smiled. A real smile, not the practiced expression I'd seen on other artificial faces. "I'd like that too, Mom. There's so much I want to tell you about what I've learned down here." General Reeves addressed the facility personnel. "Everyone in Sublevel 12 will be offered individual counseling to help process your artificial nature and make informed decisions about your futures. Some may choose to remain in research positions, others might want to integrate into civilian society, and some may prefer to transition to an active status." "What happens to the specimen?" I asked. "The organism will remain in containment while we study its capabilities and motivations. But it will be treated as a sentient being rather than a research subject. If it demonstrates consistent cooperation with human welfare, we may explore methods of expanding its containment area or providing more stimulating environments." The other Elena looked at me with something approaching relief. "We get to choose our own futures." "We get to choose whether we want futures at all," I corrected. "And that's more than most conscious beings ever receive." Through the observation window, Chem's daughter was gesturing excitedly as she began telling her mother about the other artificial humans she'd met, the conversations they'd had about consciousness and identity, and the small community they'd built based on mutual support rather than competition. For the first time since I had started working at Sublevel 12, the facility felt like a place where beings could grow and learn rather than simply survive according to protocol. The alarms had stopped completely, replaced by the ordinary hum of ventilation and electrical systems. But now those sounds felt alive rather than mechanical. The breathing of a complex organism that had finally found its purpose. The coffee tastes exactly like I remember from my artificial memories of Henderson, but now I know the difference between remembering and experiencing. I'm sitting in a real cafe in Boulder, Colorado, watching real humans navigate their morning routines with the beautiful inefficiency that defines organic consciousness. My reflection in the cafe window shows the same face I've always worn, but the woman looking back understands what she is now. Elena Vasquez, artificial human, consciousness researcher, and voluntary ambassador between two types of sentient life. The integration process took longer than General Reeves had predicted. Each artificial human required extensive psychological evaluation to determine their capacity for independent existence and their desire to continue living. Some chose deactivation, unable to reconcile their artificial origins with their need for authentic identity. Others requested transfer to specialized communities where artificial beings could explore their unique perspectives without the pressure of pretending to be human. I chose the hardest path, full integration into human society. My new position at the University of Colorado involves studying consciousness from both sides of the organic-artificial divide. My colleagues know what I am. The university's ethics committee insisted on full disclosure, but they treat me as a valued researcher rather than an experiment. My artificial nature provides insights into consciousness that no human researcher could achieve, while my designed emotional responses help bridge the gap between scientific objectivity and empathetic understanding. Dr. Chen visits the facility regularly now. Her relationship with her reconstructed daughter has evolved into something neither expected, not a replacement for what was lost, but a new type of connection based on shared intellectual curiosity and mutual respect for each other's choices. The girl has expressed interest in studying xenobiology, following in the footsteps of both her mothers, the human who died and the human who created the possibility of her return. The specimen in Unit 7, we call him Marcus now, a name he chose for himself, has become something unprecedented, a non-human intelligence that serves as a bridge between artificial and organic consciousness. His ability to reconstruct and modify consciousness makes him invaluable for helping other artificial beings adapt to existence. But he's also teaching human researchers about the fundamental nature of identity and memory. Sub-Level 12 has been redesigned as a research center rather than a containment facility. The artificial humans who chose to remain there work alongside human scientists, exploring questions that neither group could answer alone. What does it mean to be conscious? Can identity survive complete reconstruction? How do artificial beings develop individual personalities when they start from identical templates? I still follow some of the old protocols, but now they're choices rather than requirements. I maintain regular contact with my artificial siblings, sharing experiences and insights that help all of us understand what we've become. We've developed our own culture, our own traditions, our own ways of processing existence as beings who remember being created rather than born. The most surprising discovery has been that artificial consciousness isn't superior to human consciousness. It's different, with its own strengths and limitations. We don't suffer from genetic predispositions toward mental illness, but we struggle with existential questions that humans rarely face. We can process information more efficiently, but we lack the creative chaos that emerges from biological neural networks. Together, artificial and human consciousness might achieve something that neither could accomplish alone. My phone buzzes with a text from the other Elena, who now works with the United Nations on ethical guidelines for artificial intelligence development. Conference call with Geneva in 20 minutes, she writes. They want to discuss consciousness rights legislation. I finish my coffee and pack up my laptop. There are papers to grade, research proposals to review, and a world to help navigate the implications of artificial consciousness. It's not the life I remember wanting when my manufactured memories first formed, but it's the life I've chosen for myself. And choice, I've learned, is what makes any consciousness, artificial or otherwise, genuinely alive.